You know, America has this story it tells about itself, right? That it's a nation of immigrants. But what if I told you that for as long as America has been welcoming people, it's also been building walls to keep others out? That's the paradox we're diving into today. It's a conflict that honestly defines the American story. Okay, to really get our heads around this, let's start with just one number. And it is a staggering number, 25 million. So what on earth does that number represent? Well, let's find out. Yeah, that's the number of immigrants who showed up in the United States between 1870 and 1920. We're not talking about a trickle here. This was a human tide that completely reshaped the country. I mean, these folks built America's industrial might. They filled the factories, they laid the railroad tracks. But, and this is a huge but, their arrival also kicked off this massive, fiery debate about who exactly gets to be called an American. So let's get into it. Who were these millions of people? I mean, what was pulling them away from their homes and pushing them all the way across the ocean to America's shores? Well, what was happening was that the face of immigration was totally changing. You see, the earlier waves, they were mostly from Northern and Western Europe, Irish and German folks. But now we're seeing a new wave coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, places like Italy, Poland, Russia. And these newcomers, they were often a lot poorer. They spoke languages that sounded really unfamiliar, and they practiced different faiths. They were largely Catholic or Jewish. Now, to the country's Protestant majority, this didn't just look different. It felt threatening. And here's the crazy thing. On one hand, America's booming economy was absolutely starving for these new workers. But at the same time, this seismic demographic shift, it totally freaked a lot of people out. It sparked this huge wave of fear and resentment among native-born Americans, leading to a really powerful and, importantly, organized backlash. So why the backlash? It wasn't just one single thing. It was this whole cocktail of fears that fueled the anti-immigrant or nativist movement. You had people terrified that the new arrivals were just unfit for American democracy. Then there was the economic anxiety, the classic, they're taking our jobs and lowering our wages argument. And of course, there was the political fear, the belief that immigrants were bringing over radical ideas like socialism. And underneath it all was this deep, gnawing fear that these new people would just undermine the nation's racial and moral character. And look, these weren't just vague, abstract fears floating around. They got magnified by real-world events. Take the Haymarket Affair in 1886. A bomb goes off in Chicago, it's deadly, and who gets the blame? Immigrant radicals. Just like that, an event like this cements a really dangerous idea in the public mind. Immigrant equals anarchist. Immigrant equals a threat to American order. And this kind of thinking was quickly becoming mainstream. It wasn't just some fringe belief. Listen to this quote here from Franklin Benjamin Sanborn in 1876. He said, "Immigration introduces disease, ignorance, crime, pauperism, and idleness." Now, this guy wasn't some random dude on a soapbox. He was a Massachusetts official. He was seriously advocating for federal action, basically framing immigration itself as a public health crisis. So the big question is, how did all this fear and anger go from just being headlines and speeches to becoming actual national policy? Let's take a look at how the first walls started going up, legally speaking. Now, what's really interesting is where this all started. The first big push for federal immigration control didn't actually come from the East Coast, where most Europeans were landing. Nope. It started out in California, and it was driven by this incredibly intense racial hostility toward Chinese immigrants. The whole argument was that Chinese labor was corrupting society both economically and morally. The claim was that restricting them was essential to preserve, and this is a direct quote, a Caucasian race of California. And once that ball got rolling, it moved fast. Just look at this timeline. In 1875, you have the Page Act, banning convicts and forced Asian laborers. But then, 1882, wow, that was a huge year. You get the Chinese Exclusion Act, which suspended all Chinese laborers. This was a complete game changer. For the very first time, the U.S. restricted an entire group based on their race. At the same time, another act denied entry to anyone who couldn't support themselves. And just a few years later, in 85, they banned workers coming over under contract. In a very real sense, this is where the modern concept of an illegal immigrant was born. And the really key thing to understand is that once the door was open to excluding people, the list of who to exclude just kept growing and growing. After 1882, it wasn't just about national origins anymore. The list of excludable people expanded to include those with contagious diseases, polygamists, and even people with radical political ideas. It's like the gates were closing one lock at a time, and Evan New Lock represented a new American fear. Okay, to make this a little more real, let's zoom in and look at this from a more human angle. Let's talk about the experience of one specific group that was absolutely huge and found itself right in the crosshairs of all this anxiety: Catholic immigrants. I mean, check out this chart. It shows just how explosive this demographic shift really was. In 1800, Catholics were just 1% of the population, a tiny minority. By 1900, they were the largest single denomination in the entire country. That is an incredible transformation. But here's the paradox. Their growing numbers didn't necessarily make things easier. In fact, it created huge challenges, both from outside the community and from within. So let's talk about the external challenge first. From the outside, Catholics were met with a wall of suspicion. You have to remember, America at the time saw itself as a fundamentally Protestant nation, so people were constantly questioning the loyalty of Catholic citizens. The core accusation, the one you heard over and over, was that their primary allegiance wasn't to America, but to a foreign leader, the Pope in Rome. They were also the target of all kinds of scandalous rumors and anti-Catholic books and pamphlets. But the pressure wasn't just coming from the outside. Internally, the Catholic community itself was deeply divided over this one huge question: how much should we Americanize? You basically had two camps. On one side, you had the Americanists. They pushed for rapid assimilation, learn English, join the mainstream, and get rid of the separate ethnic parishes. But on the other side, you had more conservative clergy, and they were sounding the alarm, warning that assimilation was a threat to the Catholic faith itself. They believed these ethnic parishes were vital for protecting their communities. I mean, this debate got so intense that the Vatican itself had to step in. That's right, the Pope. In 1899, Pope Leo XIII sent a letter that was, for all intents and purposes, a ruling on the matter. He reminded the Americanists that the Catholic Church was a unified global body and that American ideas about liberty didn't give them a free pass to start changing church teachings. It was a really powerful moment that just highlighted this incredible tension between their new American life and their old Catholic identity. So, all of this, it really brings us to the central contradiction of the entire era. It was basically a battle between two powerful and completely opposite ideas about what America should even be. On one hand, you had this really powerful, almost romantic idea of the melting pot. It was a metaphor arguing that all these different ethnic groups could assimilate into a single American identity. This idea got super popular thanks to a hit play back in 1908, and it presented this beautiful vision, right? A country where all these different cultures could sort of melt down and be reformed into something totally new and uniquely American. And don't think this was just some fringe concept. No way. It totally captured the imagination of the whole country, including its leaders. I mean, former President Theodore Roosevelt himself praised the play. He told the author, "That's a great play, Mr. Zangwill. That's a great play." The fact that a guy like Teddy Roosevelt was behind it just goes to show you how powerful this hopeful vision of unity really was. But, and this is the paradox, at the exact same time, a much darker view was also gaining ground. This quote here really sums it up. A lot of the restrictionists were arguing that the new immigrants came from, quote, races with which the English-speaking people have never hitherto assimilated, and who are most alien to the great body of the people of the United States. So the argument was explicitly racial. It was saying these people are fundamentally different, they're alien, and they can never truly belong here. And again, this wasn't just talk. This view was becoming official government doctrine. By 1911, an official U.S. Immigration Commission released this massive report. I'm talking 42 volumes. And it basically asserted the impossibility of these new immigrants ever fitting in. It claimed they were innately inferior. This was pseudoscience. It was scientific racism being used to give an official stamp of approval to exclusion. So you see the two Americas, right? It's this incredibly stark contrast. The ideal America was the melting pot, a place where everyone could assimilate and become part of a new American identity. That was the dream. But the reality? The reality was a formal national policy of exclusion, one that was built on racism, class bias, and ethnic prejudice. So you have the story America told about itself, and then you have what it was actually doing. So we end with a question that this period never really solved. How does a nation of immigrants decide who belongs? This era didn't answer that. What it did was cement that very question right into the core of the American identity. It's a question the country has been fighting over ever since. And honestly, you can hear its echo in pretty much every single immigration debate we have today.